Advanced Grammar in Use. Martin Hewings.
Unit 20. Should, ought to, and had better. A. We can often use either should or ought to talk about obligations and recommendations. For example, you should finish your homework before you go out. You ought to finish your homework before you go out. And probability. For example, it should be ready by now. It ought to be ready by now, although in general, should is used more frequently. Ought to is used particularly in speech, and most often to talk about obligation rather than probability. When we conclude, on the basis of some evidence we have, that something is certain or very likely, we can use must, see Unit 18, but not should, or to.
It's the third time she's been skating this week. She must really enjoy it.
Note also the following details. We prefer should when we say what an outside authority recommends.
The manual says that the computer should be disconnected from the power supply before the cover is removed, rather than ought to be disconnected.
We use should or would, not ought to, when we give advice with I.
I should leave early tomorrow, if I were you. Or, I would leave early tomorrow, if I were you. Or, I'd leave early tomorrow, if I were you.
We prefer should in questions, particularly WH questions.
What should I do if I have any problems?
Should I ring you at home?
B. We use should plus have plus past participle, or ought to plus have plus past participle, to talk about something that didn't happen in the past, and we are sorry that it didn't.
We should have waited for the rain to stop. I'm sorry we didn't. We ought to have waited for the rain to stop. I'm sorry we didn't.
We often use this pattern to indicate some regret or criticism, and the negative forms, shouldn't, oughtn't to have, are almost always used in this way. We also use should, plus have, plus past participle, or ought to, plus have, plus past participle, to talk about an expectation that something happened, has happened, or will happen.
If the flight was on time, he should have arrived in Jakarta early this morning. If the flight was on time, he ought to have arrived in Jakarta early this morning.
C. We can use should in questions that are offers, or that request confirmation or advice.
Should I phone for a taxi for you?
Who should I pass the message to?
Note that in sentences like these, we can also use shall, with a very similar meaning. Compare the use of shall and should in sentences such as the following, where I shall means I intend to, and I should means I ought to.
I shall read the script on the train tomorrow. And I should read the script on the train tomorrow, but I know that I'll be too tired.
D. We can use had better, instead of should, or to, especially in spoken English, to say that we think it is a good idea to do something.
If you're not well, you'd better ask Claire to go instead. Or, if you're not well, you should ask Claire to go instead. Or, if you're not well, you ought to ask Claire to go instead.
Although we don't use it to talk about the past, or to make general comments.
You should have caught a later train. You ought to have caught a later train.
I don't think parents should give children sweets. I don't think parents ought to give children sweets.
We prefer had better, if we want to express particular urgency, or in demands and threats.
There's someone moving about downstairs. We'd better call the police quickly.
Note that the negative form is had better not, and in questions the subject comes after had.
He'd better not be late again or he'll be in trouble.
Had we better get a taxi? Should we get a taxi?
Exercises 20.1. Complete these sentences with should, ought to, plus infinitive, active. Should, ought to be plus past participle, passive, or should, ought to have, plus past participle. Using each of the verbs from the box once only. Answer: arrive, be, go, put, remove, resign, send, wear, win.
Thomas is running so well at the moment that he should win the 800 meters easily. Thomas is running so well at the moment that he ought to win the 800 meters easily. Should, ought to have won is also possible.
Where should I put the cheese? In the fridge? More likely than ought I to put. Should I have put is also possible.
The tickets should have arrived a couple of weeks before we go on holiday. The tickets ought to have arrived a couple of weeks before we go on holiday. Should, ought to arrive is also possible. Payment for the full amount should be sent with this application form. More likely than ought to be sent.
All packaging should be removed before switching on the printer for the first time. More likely than ought to be removed.
It's important to look smart at the interview. You should wear a suit. It's important to look smart at the interview. You ought to wear a suit.
There are many people who think the president should have resigned years ago. There are many people who think the president ought to have resigned years ago.
Should we answer the questions in English or in French? More likely than ought we to answer. Should we have answered is also possible.
If you want my advice, I should go by train rather than car. Ought to is not possible.
I can't imagine what's happened to Nadia. She should be here by now. I can't imagine what's happened to Nadia. She ought to be here by now. Should, ought to have been is also possible.
.2 In which sentences can you use should or must? and in which can you only use must? Where both are possible, consider the difference between should and must.
A timetable should be set for withdrawing the army. A timetable must be set for withdrawing the army. Must gives a stronger recommendation.
Lev isn't home yet. He must have been held up at work. I wonder how old Louis is.
Well, he went to school with my mother, so he must be well over 50.
If you smell gas, you should phone the emergency number. If you smell gas, you must phone the emergency number. Must gives stronger advice, and is perhaps more likely than should in this context.
You should try to visit Nepal. It's a beautiful country. You must try to visit Nepal. It's a beautiful country. Must gives a stronger recommendation.
I know I'm always complaining that my house is small, but it's very convenient for work.
Yes, it must be handy living so close to your office. 2, 3 and 6 include logical conclusions, so we use must not should.
.3 If necessary, correct these conversations using should or ought to, must, shall, or had better, or write this mark.
There's something wrong with David's computer yet again.
He must wish he'd never bought it.
The next meeting's on the 3rd of April.
I'd better make a note of that, or I'll forget.
Have you put on weight recently?
Yes. I should do more exercise, but I never seem to have time. Yes. I ought to do more exercise, but I never seem to have time.
The children from next door have been throwing stones at our windows.
Well, they'd better not do it again, otherwise I'll call the police. Well, they'd better not do it again, otherwise I'll call the police.
I'm freezing.
You should have worn a thicker coat. You ought to have worn a thicker coat.
Businesses shouldn't be allowed to give money to political parties. Businesses ought not to be allowed to give money to political parties.
I totally agree.
When have we got to be in Bristol?
By 4. I think we'd better get started. Do you want to go out for lunch?
Well, I should be revising for my maths exam. But okay. I've looked all over the house and can't find the keys.
Well, if they're not here, they must still be in the car.
It's so expensive to park here.
Yes, I don't think people should pay to park at work at all. Yes, I don't think people ought to pay to park at work at all.
Additional exercise 5, page 242.
อย่าลืม
กดกระดิ่งและกดติดตามเพื่อเพิ่มโอกาสในการเรียนรู้